There can be no reward, no benefit, no tax break for anyone or any institution, any organization in America that denies the full human rights and the full civil rights of every single one of us. And so as president, we're going to make that a priority, and we are going to stop those who are infringing upon the human rights of our fellow Americans.
Democrat presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke speaking at the forum week before last, talking about how it is we're going to approach religious institutions of faith across the spectrum who do not comply with government mandates on how it is they're going to comport themselves. And the issue of religious freedom has never been more front and center than it is today. People of faith who rely upon the protections of the First Amendment have grave concerns about the direction of things, especially as it relates to a state church being established. The founders had no desire to see that be the case. They celebrated the notion of freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. And it's a complicated situation. And somebody that I always love to catch up with because he talks me off the ledge. He gets me away from the panic. He is Father Bill Nicholas, Archdiocese of San Francisco, and he's a great voice when it comes to religious liberty and freedom and all that makes this country so strong. I'm happy to welcome him back to the program. Father Bill, good to have you back. Your reaction to what it is we're hearing out here in terms of, steering religion and faith institutions in a given direction based on government policy. I yield over to you, sir.
Well, it's good to be back, Brett, and please come off the ledge, and anyone who is proud of the faith that they profess. You made the good point at the very beginning that the founding fathers, while they did not want a state church, at the same time they did not want an atheistic society because they know something is going to fill that void, and we saw that just in the French Revolution. While both revolutions were based on Enlightenment principles, the French Revolution was atheistic, and ultimately the violence of the Great Terror filled that void. And even Robespierre, shortly before he was beheaded, tried to revive a kind of a French type of Enlightenment religion because he knew that void needed to be filled. Our founding fathers, right before the French Revolution, in our own revolution, had that insight that they needed a moral compass if this democracy was to survive. And while they didn't want a state church telling you what religion you must be, they still didn't want an atheistic society, which is why one part of the First Amendment that people love to quote is the Establishment Clause. And in many cases, they misquote it or misinterpret it, saying that Congress shall make no law with regard to an established state religion. But they forget the Free Exercise Clause as well, in which it says Congress shall not pass a law to prohibit the free exercise of religion. It's two parts of that first freedom. They shall make no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And too often people invoke the term freedom from religion, which is only a recent concoction of an atheistic movement. But in fact, our nation was founded on freedom of religion. And when it comes to things like the separation of church and state, it doesn't call for an atheistic society, but rather, when you look at how Thomas Jefferson, in his letter to the Danbury Baptist Church, first coined that phrase, separation of church and state, he puts it in the context of protecting people's consciences. He says because the person's consciences and faith must be protected, he rejoices in the words of the Constitution, and then he quotes the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Then he goes on to say, forming a wall separating church from state. So in other words, the separation of church and state is not a protection of the state from the church, but a protection of the church from the state. In other words, it protects the church from policies such as Beto O'Rourke is speaking of, in which we will be punished for our religious convictions and especially our moral convictions, which is usually the reason why so many people nowadays, I think a recent Pew Research said that there's an all-time low of people who profess a religion. A lot of it is because they just don't like the moral teachings of the church. And there are politicians who want to punish the churches for those moral teachings. And the separation of church and state is a protection of the church from the state, not the other way around.
And look, these are foundational principles. I mean, the Judeo-Christian tradition is you've got some pretty basic foundational principles in there. You don't murder people. You don't rob people. You don't lie and purposely slander people. You know, there are pretty clear prescriptions there that have been the foundation of civilization for, 5,000 years, right? And you look at this and you say, okay, so if a politician can come in and do something nuanced, say with a marriage redefinition or something like that, well, that is a very slippery slope, because at some point they'll come in and say, well, you may not speak out against murder or robbery or perjury or any of that sort of stuff. You do have that then piercing of that veil, so to speak, between the state and the faith institutions, the religions, the churches, because they will come in and start dictating terms or threaten them with an economic damage or some other sort of intimidation. I mean, this is ultimately about intimidation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And getting back to the presidential campaign, I also remember, I think it was about a week ago, Senator Cory Booker quoted scripture. I think it was Micah chapter 6, in the same context that Beto O'Rourke was speaking to I think it was a gay group of gay people. And he's basically in telling or shaming people of religion to not be, as he calls it, bigoted or discriminatory. He quoted Micah saying, "Walk humbly with your God." And so on the one hand, while they don't want religion to be an influence, they will still use it to try and put religious people in their place. And on the one hand, I find it interesting that in speaking to a group of people whose rights we certainly don't want to deny, and no one of any real faith want to discriminate or treat badly or misuse or persecute anybody, while he's speaking to a group who build upon gay liberation, or as they put it nowadays, gay pride, he's speaking to the rest of us to be more humble. And I often wonder if Christianity were to suddenly have a Christian pride movement, how that would be reacted to by the side of that Cory Booker is advocating. But at the same time, walking humbly with your God does not mean be a pushover. When they say that we need to be more humble, it's basically get out of our way, don't oppose us, don't make us angry, let us walk all over you.
Right.
But that's not what humble means. Humble means putting aside our own self-interests to live the virtues and the standards that God has given us to live as we believe people made in the image and likeness of God. We are too valuable to live just any way, and in this case, living a life of debauchery or sin or corruption, that we're called humbly to give ourselves to God, not to be a pushover for one group to walk all over us.
And it is interesting in our last 45 seconds or so, it is interesting to consider that the politicians want to go ahead and pick and choose chapters and verses out of the Bible and use it for their purposes. But if a person who is leading a faith institution, a priest, a pastor, a reverend, anybody else, decides that they're going to speak politically, there are recriminations there. It's a very interesting one-way street there, Father Bill.
I guess it is. And as I mentioned before, the Founding Fathers did not want an atheistic society. They did not want a state church. Mm-hmm. But you really can't protect the state from the church, because there are going to be people of faith who will run for public office, who will be civic leaders, who will be part of society, who will vote from their faith and from the values and standards of their faith, not to force a religion on other people, but to force or impose, or not really either that, but to influence a standard. For example, the abolitionist movement was a Christian movement that many who were against it said was imposing faith on society. And now we're a society that can't imagine slave ever having been here. And we're constantly reminding ourselves that we have come such a long way as a nation because of people of faith.
Yes. Phenomenal as always. We love catching up with you. Father Bill Nicholas, Archdiocese of San Francisco, bringing us a much needed dose of context and understanding in this overheated political world. We so appreciate you coming by today, Father, and we look forward to our next visit.
Thanks again, Brett. See you next time.
All the best. That's Father Bill Nicholas checking in, Archdiocese of San Francisco, and a phenomenal insight onto the religious liberty and freedom against the backdrop of this contentious election. I'm Brett Winterble. Plenty more straight ahead. It's the Brett Winterble Show right here on Newsmax TV.